Welcome to Political Paradigm. I'm Terry Kumi. My guest today is Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of Yaga Africa. Yaga Africa focuses on citizen mobilization for development and governance. Today we'll look at the 2023 general elections from the view of the civil society organizations. Mr. Itodo, welcome to Political Paradigm.
Thanks, it's good to see you.
CSOs play a very, very vital role, as vital as the role that we play as the media. As we build up to 2023, how's the civil society preparing for the general elections?
Well, thanks. Civil society continues to play the critical role that it plays first as a vanguard of democracy, but also an instrument of accountability, holding state actors to account on their commitments to democratic practice. You see civil society organizations involved in citizens' mobilization for different aspects of our electoral process, be it voter registration, election observation, but also see the leadership role that civil society played in the electoral reform process. I think the appetite, the salience of electoral reform was actually high because of the intervention and the engagement of citizens groups or civil society. So civil society groups are playing a fundamental role. And I say that you need to consider that estate of the realm, be it some call it fourth, some call it the fifth, as a buffer within the democratic process. If you look during the COVID-19 pandemic when it struck, when democratic institutions that should, respond, either suspended operations or couldn't function, it was civil society organizations and the media that played that role of speaking to the public, trying to build trust, but also engaging in providing, whether you call it humanitarian services or relief. So civil society organizations, are playing a critical role in the build-up to the elections. Yaga Africa is one of them. There are a lot of them. And we do so mindful of the fact that we can't talk about democratization if civil society and citizens are not at the center of any discourse about democracy.
So how's the youth vote count campaign going? Because I know it's been a couple of weeks since that started,
Yes.
right? What's the success rate of that?
No, it's been terrific, Terry. I tell you that all through this youth vote count, Nigerians made a very bold statement. And what you see is that Nigerians have not lost hope on Nigeria, particularly young people, that amidst the confusion, amidst this dystopian state of affairs of Nigeria, amidst the disillusionment, Nigerians have not lost hope on Nigeria. And for me, that's the most fascinating thing I have seen in the course of the Youth Vote Count concerts and engagement. This is not the first time. We did this in 2018, and by we, I mean the European Union that's supporting this. INEC, Yaga Africa, and other organizations were part of this. And in 2018, we went to 6 different states, went to tertiary institutions. But this time, we couldn't go to tertiary institutions for obvious reasons, ASU was on strike. But in centers like Lagos and Abuja, INEC conducted voter registration for a week, building up to the concert. And in Lagos, over 11,700 people registered through the youth vote count. In the FCT, about 17,000 people registered. That's a direct impact of the youth vote count. These are people who wouldn't have made it to the voters register, or even if they do, they would have had to grapple with the challenges and the difficulties of getting registered. So we're very excited, but I think at the heart of this is the strong statements that Nigerians are making, that they are not losing hope on this country, and if this country is going to change, it's going to change through the ballot. And it's quite profound that citizens are making this call. Citizens are participating in the process. It tells you that Nigerians actually have hope that their votes will count. It might be attributed to the new electoral law that has introduced, technology for electronic accreditation, electronic transmission of results. So there's some level of enthusiasm driven by the increased trust that citizens have in the electoral process. I think it's good for our democracy.
One of the things that's peculiar to Nigeria, especially with regards to voting and awareness, is the challenge of reaching out to those in the rural areas. I don't know how much of a challenge it was for you and what impact you think you've made or you plan to make with reaching out to those at the rural areas.
I think it's important to underscore the fact that voter education and voter mobilization is a collective enterprise. A collective enterprise. And that's important to underscore. That there are different players who are playing at different levels trying to get people. The worst of the players who have not performed their role are political parties. Because political parties have the inherent responsibility for political mobilization. But virtually all the parties in Nigeria have failed in that role, in performing that role of mobilizing people, to participate. There are a few outliers, and some you can see in the off-cycle elections. But how many political parties have taken up the gauntlet and are providing leadership in mobilizing people to collect their PVCs? After all, they are the first beneficiaries of an electoral process. If you look at, civic groups, community-based organizations, I think that we need to commend our religious institutions, we need to commend civil society, we need to commend media, and we also need to commend INEC. These institutions, with their spread across different aspects of Nigeria, have succeeded in raising public consciousness on the need to register to vote. We've also seen this new innovation on the online portal that INEC has developed. Is decentralized the process to the extent that people can pre-register. That whole pre-registration process, saw a wave of different, registration areas established by citizens, established by not just political parties, but established by religious institutions. So that has really helped. So if you say, is there impact at the community level? I'd say yes. And the figures actually say, if you look at the rates, the turnout rates for the CVR, I'd say that we're making significant effort and also progress in getting people at the grassroots level. But we just need to do more because it's beyond registering. People have got to collect their PVCs.
Absolutely. I was going to go to that because
but before they collect their PVCs, INEC needs to produce the PVCs.
But INEC has assured that, I think the INEC chairman did say at your rally, or your concert, I believe,
yes,
that the PVCs will be ready for collection by October. So I think it's another challenge to get people to go actually receive these PVCs after the registration process.
Absolutely, because in all the elections since even in Jega's era, we've seen situations where people don't end up collecting their PVCs or their PVCs are not ready before the elections. And I think the burden that this commission has is to ensure that every Nigerian who has gone out to register would have their PVCs produced and will receive their PVCs in due time in preparation for the elections.
So there's a concern as to PVCs that haven't produced but not collected. How would you suggest that probably INEC goes about it? Because I was speaking with Festus Okoye, one of the national commissioners of INEC, and I questioned if INEC was reaching out to persons whose PVCs were ready to say, your PVC is ready, come and collect it. But beyond that, how do we get these PVCs to the owners? Even if they don't want to come and collect it. For some persons, the process is tedious. It's almost as tedious as actually going through the registration process again.
Why isn't it called PVC distribution? Why is it called PVC collection? Because there is, an ideological argument that because it's a democracy, people need to show up. People need to express interest. So by coming to collect your PVC, you're actually exercising and expressing interest. And I say INEC is beyond a regulator, is a service provider. And the rules are in business that customer is king. So voters, can be conceived as, the customers of INEC. And if INEC can make the efforts to get people's PVCs across to them, even though it comes with a cost, I think we've got to do that to get people to do what? To come out and vote. The reason is the whole notion of political legitimacy. How do you explain that in 2019, of the 4,084 registered voters, only 29 million decided, who is the president? Only 29 million people voted. So the minority of us are determining for the majority of us. And that needs to be reversed. So the whole concept of political legitimacy actually derives from what are the majority of people who have, the responsibility to vote? How many of them are actually showing up to vote? So INEC and stakeholders need to make the effort. And I think that one way of disrupting this entire space and ensuring that people come out for 2023 elections is INEC needs to make the extra effort. As soon as PVCs are ready, people should receive notification that their PVCs are ready. They should receive notification on where their PVCs are located. INEC has a PVC locator component of the website. Can those data be updated in such a way that voters whose PVCs are ready will know and they know where to pick them up? Again, the other challenge is to even locate INEC local government offices. Can INEC also ensure that the local government offices are geotagged so people can use Google Maps to track those offices and go there to collect, their PVCs? I think that we can't continue to rely on the old ways of doing stuff. And if INEC prides itself as a progressive commission, if it prides itself as a commission that is driven by innovation, like we have seen with the BVAS, with electronic transmission of result, the creation of polling units, then it needs to go an extra step by ensuring that PVCs are distributed closer to the people so people don't have to stress themselves.
Well, that's one way to improve voter turnout, considering that in 2019, just as you mentioned, just about 34% of the population voted, and that's terrible. But then,
and embarrassing.
There's an awareness now.
Yeah.
There's a level of awareness now, especially with the registration process. Do you believe that in 2023, with this awareness, that we could have an improvement in the voter turnout?
I'm very optimistic that we would have an increased level of turnout for a lot of reasons. Terry, you're a Nigerian, I'm a Nigerian. Look at our country today. I'm not ashamed to be a Nigerian, I'm sure you're not, but I'm disappointed at the state of affairs of the country. Nigerians are angry. Nigerians are disenchanted. And you know why? Because leadership has failed. People cannot connect the state of livelihoods and their participation in the political process. How do you explain that the state is so weak that it cannot protect its citizens? How do you explain that justice, which is at the heart of our constitution, our democracy, is for a few that can afford it? The top 1%. So the other 99% are nothing but slaves, to this ruling political class who are so reckless and don't even think about we the people. Look at welfare, look at just jobs. Just look at the polarization within the Nigerian state today. And why is it that we keep being led by the worst of us? If you also look at the parties, look at the candidate nomination process. Highly commercialized. Those are not my words. Those are words of people, testaments and testimonies of people who participated in the exercise. We have seen, the resistance from the people. And you've also seen how people have responded, right? So Nigerians are angry because they can feel the pain of how bad leadership can destroy, the moral fabric and the progress of a country. And they are determined this time to go out and cast their vote. So I see a huge turnout. The second is the fact that there is optimism and trust in the system and the process. And that trust just devolves. Look at the Ekiti elections. The process was a marked improvement. But what did the politicians do? They infiltrated the election with a lot of resources to buy votes from people. And it's such a shame. Whilst, yes, we consider this a weaponization of poverty, but Nigerians also need to know that the more they do this, they damage our democracy. The more they sell their votes, they reduce and limit the opportunities that we have to elect credible leaders. Because politicians want to continually make us powerless. And they know that if you vote based on your conscience and you vote based on competence, good leaders will emerge that will be responsive and accountable to the people. But if they buy your vote, it means they've made you powerless, and for 4 or 8 years, you cannot even speak or ask them any question. And it serves their interest and not our interest. And so, as we say people should come out to vote, and people are going to come out to vote, they must also do so from an informed point of view. Because, Terry, I would rather low turnout of informed people who are making informed choices than high turnout of uninformed voters. Because what they do is they give us the kind of inexperienced, inept leadership that we have at different levels in our country. And so the task before us, it's not just asking people to come out. It's to ask them why are they coming out and what are they coming out for. It's to begin to tell Nigerians and teach them how to elect better leaders. That it's not one who uses buzzwords all the time. That the use of buzzwords is not what qualifies you to be a competent leader. You need to have understanding of what? The fundamental functions of leaders. And it's there in our constitution. If you cannot provide for welfare and the security for the Nigerian people and provide the how and the timelines to do that, then you have no business being in office. If you cannot manage our diversity as a country, then you have no business being in office. If you're one who thinks that you represent a particular section of a country or a leader who has only the map of his local government or his village in his head and does not recognize that we are a diverse nation of 36 states and the FCT with over 300 ethnic groups, with diverse religion, and the fact that we're a federal state where everyone should be part of governance, then you have no business being in public office. And these are the fundamental questions that Nigerians are asking.
You know, this conversation is one that's easily had among the educated, the governed. But those ones who are undergoverned, poorly governed, or uneducated, how do we reach people like this to get them to understand how important it is to make these informed choices? When you talk about your concern of having preferring a low turnout of informed voters to a high turnout of uninformed voters, how do we convert the uninformed to informed at that level of persons who have been beaten by hunger, that have been weaponized by politicians? What's the outreach plan?
I don't completely agree that the people at the grassroots don't know what they want. I don't completely agree. Everybody, every human being wants a good life. What they demand for in your village is they want security. They want access to water. They want their primary healthcare centers equipped with competent doctors and nurses. And they have access to as simple as whether you call it Panadol or paracetamol or Flagyl. They want to be able to walk into those primary healthcare centers. That's what they want.
Or they just want to eat.
Or they just want to eat.
Well, that's where the vote buying and selling comes in.
No, but not just even vote buying, but the fact that they want to eat. They want to ensure that if they are farmers, there's access to the market where they can sell their products. Or they can go to the market and the cost of gari will not be as high as 1,000. Or even tomatoes. So these are the things. This is what democracy, at a micro level, it's about what? It's about the problem. It's about welfare. And so they know what they want. The big question is, how do we help them decipher, who and which party can be trusted with the responsibility to perform their duties under a social contract? And it's a responsibility of political parties. But how can political parties, perform their function when delegates have been procured? No, that's even taking it too far. Where congresses are compromised and you have people who don't mean well for the people emerge out of congresses. or even delegates. We're all witnesses to the fact that just one delegate, post one of the conventions, went back to his constituency, and the proceeds from the delegates, from the convention, he used that to provide welfare for his community. Now, there's this socialization that we need to reverse. And it's a function and a role of both civil society and persons like you and media organizations and political parties to continue to conscientize, to continue to, promote, issue-based politics in the course of our engagement of the next election. And fundamentally, Nigerians need to tell political parties and candidates to come and debate issues and tell us how they want to lead, whether local government or national assembly or even at the presidential or governorship level. They need to come and tell us. And I tell people, any candidate or any political party that is uninterested and does not want to come and speak to you and tell you and unravel its roadmap on how it's going to lift you out of poverty, then it's undeserving of your vote. I'm sure you know that there are some parts of the country where elections cannot hold. Why? Because bandits have taken over the entire space. Look at Niger. Just a few days ago, how many deaths were recorded in the mines following the attacks of bandits? Look at Benue. Look at Taraba. Look at Kaduna. Look at different parts of the country, even in FCT, this federal capital. So we're dealing with, multidimensional security crisis, and we don't want people who will come and explain our problems for us. No. Nigeria needs people who will solve those problems. And anyone who is not ready to solve those problems within a definite time frame does not deserve the vote of the Nigerian people.
Let's talk about this fixed election campaign that Yaga initiated about 2 years ago. What's the level of impact you've had with that?
I'd say that it's been very impactful. We contributed, to the electoral reform process. There were several actors and other civil society organizations. And by the way, fixed elections, it's an electoral reform project implemented by Yaga Africa, by other organizations under the European Union Support for Democratic Governance project. You had the International Press Center, the Women Trust Fund, you had PLAC, you had Albino Foundation, you had Center for Citizens with Disability. There are a host of a lot of organizations, and it was supported by the EU. And what we did was to mobilize citizens to demand electoral reforms. And we ensured that there was pressure on the National Assembly to pass the Electoral Act. There was pressure on the President, to pass the Electoral Act. We employed different tactics in engaging the National Assembly, engaging the committees directly, and also putting pressure, on those who needed to take action on the Electoral Act. And the good thing is we've got a new electoral law, thanks to Nigerians, who spoke. One of the turning points of fixed elections was when the National Assembly tried to kill, the proposal for electronic transmission of results, or the provision that vests INEC with the power to review, results declared under duress. Because we're monitoring and following that process, citizens spoke, and the National Assembly had no choice, particularly the Senate, had no choice but to reverse its position. But in the concluding days of that particular bill, the president didn't assent to the bill when he was meant to do so. We had told Nigerians that if the president didn't pass, the legislation, sign the bill by the 22nd of February, INEC will be compelled to shift the date of the election because of the provision of Section 28 of the Act, of the bill, now an act, that provides that notice of election shall be issued 360 days. We told Nigerians that was why we protested. The president didn't assent on the 22nd, but he assented on the 25th of February by 12:25 p.m. And few days later, INEC had to issue a timetable shifting the dates of the elections by virtue of that. But one of the things we also did was we also exposed things like, cross-referencing gaps in the law. There were also drafting errors, which we, raised in the public space. And the National Assembly was responsive to clean up the legislation before it went back to the president. But you can see we are still in the reform process. because you've had court decisions based on the act. You've also seen cases where the National Assembly claimed that they made a mistake by not including a particular clause in Section 84 that recognizes statutory delegates. And I see that they're also making efforts to amend the law. I hope that will be in the post-2023 era and not now. Because any attempt, to amend the electoral law within this current context, because we're already in the elections, will not bode well for our democracy. And it actually negates the principles of the African Charter on Democracy and Good Governance, as well as the ECOWAS Protocol, and even the Venice Commission, for which Nigeria did acquiesce to the contents of those documents.
Based on the new electoral acts now, pending the amendments by National Assembly, which may not really have an impact on INEC's position, let's assess the Independent National Electoral Commission's preparations towards the 2023 elections now. Does it suggest that, especially with the innovations that the Commission is trying to come up with, if you look at the Ekiti State election, does it give you hope that INEC is on course for the 2023 elections?
I think if you look at the last 3 elections, you would see a marked improvement. And Yiaga Africa, in our report on the Ekiti elections, did recognize the marked improvement. First, we know that technology will determine the 2023 elections. And this technology is used for, 1, the electronic accreditation of voters, the electronic transmission of results. These 2 key components of our electoral process are central to the success of the election. But we've seen a marked improvement. If you look at the functionality of the BVAS in Anambra compared to the FCT and compared to Ekiti, you can see a progression. And when we looked at the graph, it was, an astronomical progression. There's been a marked improvement. Because in our data on the Ekiti elections, from our sample polling units, BVAS was deployed in 100% of the polling units. It functioned optimally in 94%. It did, and then in 6% of polling units, the BVAS malfunctioned and it was fixed. So you clearly see that as a marked improvement. But we can't just look at Ekiti as a baseline. Let's wait for Osun, because that's going to be more difficult election. Then we can now come to the drawing board and say, yes, INEC appears to be sufficiently prepared. The second is the issue about the polling units. INEC succeeded in creating additional polling units. It used to be 120,000. Now we've got 176,000 polling units. About 54,000 new polling units were created. What we've seen within the polling units distribution is, 1, you've got polling units that are underserved. And what this means is you see polling units, newly created polling units with 1 or 2 voters. It doesn't make sense. It defeats the entire purpose for the creation of polling units, because the rationale is if you create new polling units, additional polling units, you improve access. So you don't have decongestion, you don't have congestion at polling units. So you decongest by creating new polling units. But we still go ahead and see polling units with still 1,000, 3,000, even 2,000 voters in one particular polling unit. So INEC needs to ensure that there's a redistribution, and that needs to be done as fast as possible, so people know that they've been allocated new polling units. So they don't show up on election day at polling units and then their names are not on the register, whereas they've been allotted a new polling unit. So that's second. I think the third part deals with, the recruitment and the training of the officials. I think is at the heart of the success of the next elections. And both NYSC, students of tertiary institutions, and a National University Commission of Committees of Vice Chancellors, INEC needs to ensure that in the recruitment of polling officials and the training, there has to be an improvement. We want to see polling officials who understand how to effectively use the BVAS, who understand how to comply with guidelines and the manuals provided for them. But we can't talk about preparations without talking about logistics, because logistics have always been a challenge. There was improvement in Ekiti. We wait to see how INEC will manage the logistics for Osun. But these are also single elections. In the general elections, you've got elections happening in 36 states and the FCT simultaneously. The level of oversight that you have in a single election may not be guaranteed, in a general election. You also have an already overstretched security architecture. So the election itself is going to be complex and organized within this particular context. And so INEC needs to work closely with stakeholders to ensure the success of the next election. But Terry, the independence of INEC is the biggest threat that, that we need to focus our attention. That if the independence of INEC is undermined and threatened, then the credibility of the electoral process, will not be guaranteed. And my greatest fear for 2023 is whether, the incumbents, both at the national and the state level, will recognize and respect INEC's independence in conducting the elections. All these interferences, with the operations of the commission, it's inimical to democratic practice. And I hope that, like the president said when he was in Portugal, that you give INEC, the free space. He doesn't even have a choice because the Constitution actually requires him to do so. That they are not doing us a favor, right? The Constitution guarantees INEC's independence, and its decisions shall not be subject to the authority of any individual. And we've got to recognize that. So when INEC takes its decision, there is no pressure from anywhere, to make INEC reverse its decision or amend or review its decision. But INEC also have a role to insulate themselves. And both the chairman and the resident electoral commissioners. Look at what's happening with, the reports on the conduct of the primaries from the states. You see, Akwa Ibom State, there's a lot of controversy. You also see what's happening, in Yobe State. I think when the commission takes decisions of that nature, Nigerians should rise and defend INEC and support INEC, because protecting INEC's independence is not just a role for the state. Citizens also need to rise up and support the commission, especially when the commission is on the path to upholding the credibility of the process. But where it deviates, Nigerians should not hesitate to hold INEC to account.
There is a concern with the Electoral Act, campaign financing limits. How do you see this coming to play in the build-up to the elections? The limits were increased in this amended Electoral Act, and that's a concern for many. It's almost suggesting that the election will go to the highest bidder.
Empirically, Terry, in the last 2 cycles of election, no party has upheld and complied with the spending limits imposed by the Electoral Act. It's there. In fact, they even testified. Because before the spending limit for presidential election was capped at 5 billion, it was 1 billion. But the PDP and the APC in 2015 and in 2019, it's there in the record books, spent above, the spending limit. Did the law took its full course? No, it didn't. It's the impunity, because the institutions that should regulate political behavior, that should impose sanctions, are weak. Why are they weak? Because you have a reckless political class that wants to seize power at all costs. Politicians do not play by the rules because they want power at all costs. And that's the threat, to our democracy. They are undermining and compromising judges because they know that the judiciary, by virtue and the power of judicial review, can actually dispense justice. But when they are incapacitated, they cannot deliver electoral justice. And so when you look at this campaign spending limit, INEC is vested with the responsibility, to track and monitor campaign funding. But the commission has also recognized its lack of capacity, both technical and financial capabilities to do so. Progress has been made because in 2019, INEC did, they actually documented expenses that were made by political parties and did establish that the parties actually went above that. But who is going to hold the parties to account? The regulator should do that. But when the National Assembly members, design laws that expands and extends the spending limit, they do so because of their own political reality. And you have EFCC and you have the ICPC. What role do they have? They have a critical role in monitoring and tracking those campaign spending. It's in this country, and I don't want to sound controversial, but in this country, we've seen people, whether in bullion vans or even in Ghana Must Go, who should be held to account for money laundering. But how many of them are being held to account? And in this case, both the APC, both the PDP are complicit in flouting campaign spending limits. And this should be unacceptable. And I think any party that considers itself interested in our democracy should demonstrate in words and in actions that it is willing to obey and comply with the law.
I tell you what else is unacceptable, and that's the issue of underage voting. Our previous elections have been marred by underage voting, and there are concerns as to whether INEC has a role to play in addressing the underage voting menace. So as we go into the 2023 general elections, how do we address the issue of underage voting? Does it lie solely on INEC? Do the security agencies get a role to play in this?
Underage voting is not the root cause. Underage voting is a symptom of a particular disease that affects our democracy. And I'll expend my energy on tackling the root cause and not the symptom. Because why do politicians mobilize underage voters to register or cast their votes? Why do they do so? They do so because it's a zero-sum game. The politics is a do-or-die affair. So all these shenanigans is what they explore to do what? To get the votes at all costs. Secondly, because there is a political narrative and a socialization out there that your access to the promise of democracy is contingent on the number of votes that you are able to garner. That's why in the political space, they ask this whole language about whether you delivered or not. This whole concept of delivery is did you deliver, your constituent? Did you deliver your polling units? And you see politicians celebrate and even do Thanksgiving in church because they deliver their polling unit. Why? Because it's the currency that they need to negotiate for political power as well as to negotiate in a patronage system that we practice. So we've got to deal with that. But we say, can INEC do this? There are cases where INEC, have asked the voters to go and provide, a means of identification. And what do you see? We've seen cases where there's that community conspiracy. And the lives of the INEC officials are threatened that if they don't allow those people to vote, they are going to be beaten up or they will even be killed. But what INEC and other stakeholders can do on this, and by the way, Terry, this might also sound controversial, but I've observed elections across Nigeria and in other parts of the world. And I'm very grateful to God for that opportunity. Underage registration happens in different parts of the country. It's not concentrated in one part of the country. The big question is whether it happens in higher levels than others. I have seen underage registrants in the southern part of the country, and I have seen in the northern part of the country. So let's not politicize this. Let's consider this as a national problem. And the best way to fix this, it starts with politicians changing their attitude towards politics. And to also Nigerians as well, to resist this temptation from politicians to compromise them. Because what they do is they imperial our democracy and they put the moral conscience of the nation under question. And no nation, any nation that does not have national conscience is headed for doom. Because when the chips are down, it's what is contentious that becomes the philosophy that drives the country. And maybe political settlements will be fostered around those issues. So for me, these are the big issues that we need to deal with.
Someone said to me that if you're waiting for politicians to develop a conscience, just as you have suggested, that they need to, be interested in changing the process, that we may wait forever. So you had raised a point where you said that even when INEC tries to implement the age requirement, asking these voters or supposed voters to go get some means of identification, that they are threatened by the communities. And it almost suggests that that is where we will continue to be until something is done, because we cannot wait for the politicians to address it. So now, does this now suggest that the security agencies, you already talked about how lean our security structures are, does it now suggest that the security agencies may not be able to give the required protection to ensure that INEC implements the law as it is?
You see, they are able to do that. And the truth is, the state has a responsibility. And what's that agency that you interface with in your criminal justice system is the police. The big question is, the police, whilst I note that the police may be facing some challenges, funding, training, the bigger problem that the police faces is the question of whether loyalty is to the Constitution of Nigeria or loyalty is to an individual. And this, it's evident in elections, where you see where security agencies, are compromised by these same politicians and political actors. But we've also seen, police, the Nigerian police and security agencies, perform their functions in a professional and diligent manner. Some people have been brought to book. But the big question is, how many people that have been arrested have been prosecuted? It's in this same Nigeria, the police arrested, defaulters and electoral offenders. But they were not prosecuted. We saw some of them, on the streets the following day. They are let loose. In this same country, a politician was caught with PVCs, which is a crime. He committed an electoral offense. Was he prosecuted? No. He made it to the National Assembly and was legislating for you and I. That's an electoral offender. But this same country that we have, there's also legislators in the National Assembly who did what? Who tendered false documents, fake examination results. All the court did was to nullify their action. Did you prevail on them and arrest them because it's a crime? No. But in this same Nigeria, in the National Assembly, you have a senator who was alleged that at gunpoint ordered a returning officer to declare him winner. But he's in the National Assembly. Now, when you have a political leadership that is dominated by people who don't have regard for morals, what you do is you institutionalize corruption, you institutionalize this kind of decadence that we see within our space. But the Nigerian people have a role to play, which is why I am so excited with what I see in INEC offices, where people are demanding that they must collect their PVCs. Nigerians are resisting. And let's not think that Nigerians are going to sit and fold their hands and continue to accept, this bad behavior from Nigerian politicians. No, Nigerians are resisting. We've seen that resistance. Even in this administration, the National Assembly made an attempt to pass social media bill. Didn't citizens speak out? They spoke, and the National Assembly withdrew. I've just cited an example where the Senate voted against electronic transmission of results. They even deleted, some sections in the bill. Didn't Nigerians speak and the lawmakers heeded their call? That's what democracy is about. It's about constructive argument and constructive engagement. these politicians are never going to stop this behavior. I'm not saying we should expect them to change, but eternal vigilance is the price that we pay for liberty, which is why citizens need to constantly knock on the doors of their leaders, because they do so as a matter of right and not a privilege.
Let's talk about the youth participation now. The Not Too Young to Run Act will be coming to play for the second general elections. Let's look at the 2019 elections and how impactful that act was. And from the political landscape that you see now, if it will really, if we would have an improvement in 2023.
Yes, we will. When I look back at, when you reflect on democracy and Nigeria's democracy, and look at how young people organized for Not Too Young to Run and the results that they achieved, it gives me hope that Nigerians can make change happen if committed, if united, and if driven, by a sense of collective ownership and collective responsibility. Because that's the story of Not Too Young to Run. It was about a generation that rose to say, no, enough is enough of old and expired politicians. We want younger people in the room. And they worked with a generation that cared about political inclusion. They used their phones, and from the streets, they organized. So you give it to these young Nigerians. And we're telling young Nigerians that if you could achieve Not Too Young to Run, if you could achieve NSAS, because some people think NSAS was not successful. And I say, no, you can't define whether NSAS is successful or not. But you saw a government responding and the president speaking, who traditionally will not even speak, who are very slow to speak. He spoke, and SARS was banned, even though police brutality has not ended. But the NSAS was successful. And if you look at that success, coupled with, milestones that citizens have achieved, even with the Electoral Act, it tells you that there is hope. So young people can still achieve it. But this demographic majority is a political minority. And that is the challenge, the burden that this generation has. That in 2023, can we reverse that? In 2019, only 28% of young people who are on the voters register voted in the presidential elections. Just 28%. 12 million of the 29 million that came out. They were what? They were young people. But in the voters register, 51.1% are young people. These are data released by INEC. And then in the governorship election, only 29%. So what you have is in 2019, only less than 30% of young people came out to vote. We got to reverse that in 2023, where 60% of young people, if they come out to vote in 2023, I think Nigeria will get the leadership that
But beyond the participation in the voting process, participation in politics itself.
Yeah, but I was going to come to that, because if you look at the level of youth representation, in 2015, the youth candidacy was 25%. In 2019, due to Not Too Young to Run and other factors, it moved to 34%. For the first time since return to democracy, you had 20 young people between 25 and 29 who won elections in 2019. This time around, we've seen young people who have secured tickets. There's a young lady who is 26 in Kwara who won her nomination, as an APC candidate for a State House of Assembly. You have other less than 30 who are in different states. Can these people win elections in 2023? They can, and they will win if, they galvanize and organize people. But as you know, the political process is so compromised, so commercialized, and also exclusionary of a lot of young people. Look at the cost of nomination forms, for heaven's sake. A lot of young people couldn't purchase those forms. Why? Because the cost is just not only exorbitant, but it's exploitative. And that's what our democracy now mirrors, that it's about the highest bidder and the highest spender. We're going to build a plutocracy if we continue on this trajectory, and I think it needs to stop.
My concern is whether this awareness at the federal level extends to the subnationals and the local governments and ward levels as such, because you find that it would seem that the attention is focused on who becomes president and less attention is focused on who emerges as governor, who emerges as your state's rep at the state houses of assembly, or even your local government chairman. What level of, do you think that in 2023, or as we build up to 2023, that the awareness extends to the lower levels?
I think there's an appreciable level of awareness, but we need to do more because Nigeria is such a large and diverse country. We've got to invest in political education. And this is where political parties have a role to play. Different stakeholders have a role to play. But you know what? Nigerians also need to know. Every Nigerian is represented by, one, a legislator in your state house of assembly, a member of the Federal House of Reps, a senator, right? And at your local government level, you are also represented by a councillor. So at the end of the day, every Nigerian is represented by about seven persons who you have transferred power to hold in trust for you. The big question is whether we're engaging these people. All of them are equally important as the president. So when we focus a lot of attention, on the president, and I ask myself, there is a National Assembly that will make the laws that will regulate the behavior of the executive. There's a National Assembly that will perform oversight to limit the excesses of the executive. The people who go to the National Assembly, the people who go to the State House of Assembly are important. All of them, including the presidential candidates, must be held to the same standards. This attitude of focusing on the president, it will keep us at this particular level, because when you focus on the presidential elections, you now have incompetent people in the National Assembly who cannot speak, who cannot back, and who cannot bite. And the parliament, by design, is vested with the powers to check the executive. When things happen, when Nigerians, have petitions to submit, they go to the National Assembly because those are their representatives. So if you don't have someone who can represent you in the National Assembly or in your state houses of assembly and you focus on the presidential, you're going to regret it at the long run. So it's important that as we talk about the elections, we also raise the bar on the discussion about who is going to the National Assembly. We've seen how a National Assembly that is planned, a National Assembly that is compromised, a National Assembly or State House of Assembly that does not have, the courage to question the executive, how it imperils democracy. And this whole notion of a rubber stamp legislature, the way to reverse that is to way to cure that from happening or stop that from happening is from the elections. Ensure that the people you are voting as reps in the State House of Assembly and the National Assembly are people who have what it takes.
The awareness is very important because we find that Nigerian elections are characterized by the bandwagon effect, where the president wins from one political party and then it trickles down and people just go and thumbprint for a particular political party because of the president. And at the end of the day, you have sent the wrong person there. And that's a challenge for us. But let's talk about, just before we go, let's talk about the Electoral Offences Commission. The bill just scaled second reading in the House of Representatives. INEC had said that it would want to be vested with the powers to carry out these investigations and prosecutions. But it would seem that the National Assembly is proposing an entirely different independent commission to carry out this function. Which should it be?
I don't think INEC should be vested with the powers to arrest, investigate, and prosecute. The Justice Ways Committee recommendation and the Namani Committee, proposed a separate commission because overburdening INEC with the responsibility of prosecuting electoral offenders, I think is one of the disservice that lawmakers have made to the institution. Our politicians have a smart way of undermining institutions because you make institutions weak by vesting them with powers and responsibilities and mandates that realistically that they can't perform. Or you starve them of resources and funding so they can't perform that responsibility. Because what's the nexus? INEC does not have a security arm that would arrest, that would investigate. It may prosecute. But wait, why do we in the first place even categorize those offenses as electoral offenses? Yes, they happen within an election, but the criminal code, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, the penal code already categorizes certain deviant behavior as offenses. So why shouldn't the police and other law enforcement agencies take that responsibility? So I think this bill is timely. I wish that we had concluded this before now, but it's good to see that the National Assembly is prioritizing this. We do need an electoral offenses commission that will prosecute, electoral offenders and do so timeously, because that would limit and address this impunity that pervades every aspect of our electoral process.
Samson Itodo, thank you very much for coming to speak with us on Political Paradigm.
Always a delight.
Well, that's Political Paradigm today. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to remind you that you can go to the website, channelstv.com, and catch up on this, or just go to YouTube and type Political Paradigm. I'm Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.